also want to jump in to respect your evenings and your time. So I'm Emily Hurst. I've met so many of you. I miss seeing so many of you. It's been wonderful to connect in the past few weeks during orientation and material pickup and math testing, but we hope you are doing okay in these continuously difficult times. So with me tonight, I'm super excited to have our wonderful head of school, Elissa Young. Give a wave, Elissa. Our fabulous new director of operations, who's not so new anymore, Madison Gould. She's talked to so many of you on the phone and in person in recent weeks. And then some important members of our Hebrew Public Charter School Network. So that's John Rosenberg, CEO. You've all met John before at past webinars and town halls, and then Emily Fernandez, our Chief Schools Officer as well. Thank you all for joining us this evening. A big thanks to our team, including Roger, who's supporting us tonight, who had the day off today, and here they are with us this evening. So we're very grateful for that. Go ahead to the next slide, Roger. Great. So the agenda tonight, this is our overview of who's joining us. You can go to the next one, Roger, thanks. We're going to dive right in. So we want to kind of give you an overview of the past 6 weeks and all the things that we've learned and our shift to our most recent re-entry plans. We'll really dive into a lot of the specifics for you and exactly what you can expect. And go through some details of the choice of the model. We are really encouraging you to do what you think is best for your child and your family. We know that some households have particular challenges right now, and others are facing greater risks at sending your child to school due to health conditions of either your child or household members. So we want to lay everything out there and really help you make the most informed and thoughtful decision that's right for your family. And so we're going to shift right now into what's to come. We'll also wrap up with some frequently asked questions that either we've heard as well as a chance for you to ask a few more questions. Roger, you can go head to the next slide, please. Great. So we have had a busy 6 weeks of school, and I actually am going to hand it off right now to Elissa Young, who's going to run us through where we are. Next slide, Roger.
Thank you, Emily. As Emily shared, we've had a really busy first 6 weeks of school, and we want to just thank all of you for your partnership, because we wouldn't be able to be where we are and do what we've done without your support. So here are just some highlights for what we've accomplished in the first 6 weeks. First, we've trained our team on our health and safety protocols and practiced them. Many of you who have come from material pickup or map testing have experienced those yourself. And the same goes for our virtual teaching. So our teachers have been super hard at work learning and practicing their skills and flexing their skills to be online teachers. We've also launched what we hope you found to be a rigorous and joyful learning experience despite the challenges of remote learning. We engaged families and students in orientation through a number of different platforms, videos, our helpline, material pickup, and then of course in-person orientation for our kindergarten students, our youngest Philadelphia Hebrew Public students. We've made sure that our special education supports are up and running. So our special education case managers have been in touch with students who have IEP services. And then also we're really proud that our related services are in the process of either being in place or someone has connected with you if your child received speech therapy, occupational therapy, or physical therapy. And lastly, we're really proud of the partnership that we have with the Boys and Girls Club that is supporting our students and families just to ensure, one, that there's childcare during the day if a family doesn't have someone able to support in that way, as well as to ensure that our students are able to access our remote learning platform. Next slide, Roger.
We have also spent the last 6 weeks preparing our facility for our students to return. So a couple of things that we've been working on. We've updated our HVAC system to increase our fresh air intake to our classrooms, as well as installed exhaust to maximize outflow. We launched updated cleaning protocols with our new custodial team. You can see our phenomenal custodial supervisor Elijah here on the screen, and that includes using our specialized equipment, including our electrostatic sprayer. So here you can see Elijah with the device and some more information about it on the screen. As Elissa mentioned, whenever we have had the opportunity to have families as well as staff visiting our building, we've worked hard and gotten to implement and enforce our health screening and social distancing protocols. And we've installed new student desks. You can see them all lined up here in the hallways. They're now in classrooms, and we're continuing to invest in PPE for our students, staff, and families whenever you come up to the building.
Great. Next slide. We've also paid really close attention to what's happening in Philadelphia. And so just to give you an overview, currently there are only 3 other peer charters who are offering in-person options. And so we're really eager to connect with those schools as well to kind of hear how things are going and any advice they have. Approximately half of current charters are actually planning to transition to in-person options in November. And we're hearing in real time that some of those are revising, and they might be actually pushing back a little bit later. Though, as you'll see earlier, and later we'll discuss, we are currently planning on transitioning on November 19th to our plan. And schools are citing a variety of reasons for their delay, a lot of which are really around operational readiness and having staff who are able to kind of manage these various models. As far as we know, School District of Philadelphia schools are still technically scheduled to reopen on November 17th. Though, as you may be, we are pretty skeptical on whether that will be moving forward, and I've heard a few rumors that it might be delayed as well. Next slide.
Okay, so Emily, thank you. I'm going to speak a little bit to current context here around the progress of coronavirus and what we're seeing in Pennsylvania. A number of you may have joined us for our summer town hall for Philadelphia Hebrew Public, and if you did, you'll recognize this dashboard. This is a way of encapsulating the data for the state of Pennsylvania around a number of key indicators in terms of the coronavirus in the state and in each individual county, including Philadelphia County. The rates that we're seeing right now, and the 2 primary things we look at are the incidence rate and the positive test rate. Positive test rate being the percentage of tests in a given day or over a period of days that come back positive. Based on those 2 measures, we're seeing a similar rate of the virus's spread to what we saw over the summer. There was a bit of a dip in the last 2 months. The rate's been coming back up again a little bit. If you could turn to the next slide, please, Roger. The state of Pennsylvania has done a good job so far of clarifying, based on those rates, where a given community is in terms of either low level of transmission, moderate, or substantial. And as you can see on the chart below, we continue to be in a moderate posture in Philadelphia. And what that means is that we are allowed to either operate a fully remote model or a blended learning model, what we're calling a hybrid model. I want to note, by the way, that when my colleague Emily Hurst was referring to the School District of Philadelphia technically planning to reopen its schools for in-person, it would be under that blended or hybrid model. Children would not, for the most part, be in school every day of the week, or for full days, they'd be in some of the time. And as you'll hear more about our proposed model in a little bit later tonight. So based on this current data, you'll be hearing more from the team about the plans that they have. And in addition, if I can get the next slide, Roger, I'm going to share a little bit about our experience in New York City. So for those of you, again, who were present for the August town hall, Hebrew Public, the network that supports Philadelphia Hebrew Public, actually manages schools, both Philadelphia Hebrew Public and Philadelphia, and we also work with and manage 3 campuses in New York City, 2 in Brooklyn and 1 in Harlem. Based on the state of the virus in New York City, we launched our hybrid program on September 21st and have been up and running now with that program for a good 3 weeks, heading into our 4th week of instruction this week. However, 2 of those schools last week were both ordered to close for in-person. Remote instruction, of course, continues in a very full way. But those closures were ordered by the city and state of New York. And they were ordered not because of outbreaks in the school or because of positive test results or infections in the school, rather because of what they call community spread. The neighborhoods in which those schools are located, we're seeing particularly high increases in the rate of coronavirus. We don't know how long those closures will be in effect for, but one of the things that's important to note here is we benefited from weeks of planning, as has Philadelphia Hebrew Public. Students wore masks when they were in school at those 2 schools and continue to do so at Harlem Hebrew. We did all of the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning work that Madison was referring to for Philly. We have a set of very strict protocols in place around arrival and drop-off, around parents and staff reporting any symptoms that they have, around temperature checking, and a whole set of other things that you've heard about previously from us, and certainly that are prominent in the news right now around the guidance and recommendations of public health experts. All of that, having been in place in our schools, has meant that the schools are as safe as they can be while operating in person for a limited number of children. What's really important as we move towards a planned hybrid launch for Philadelphia Hebrew Public is that families fully support, with great seriousness, all of those protocols. So if you are going to choose hybrid in person for your child or for your children, which we certainly support if that's the choice that's right for you, it's really important that you take as seriously as our staff are taking all of the requirements to ensure that your child, your family, and your fellow families and children, and our staff and their families are all as safe as possible through providing in-person services. If I can have the next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Emily Fernandez, our Chief Schools Officer, to talk a little bit about some of the things that we learned in terms of the instructional side of doing this, because obviously this is much more complicated than in a typical school year, and she's going to share some of our high-level insights. Emily?
Great, thank you. And good evening, everyone. We appreciate you taking the time tonight, and we're happy to be here to talk a little bit about what we've learned and what comes next for Philly. So as John noted, we opened in a hybrid model of 2 days of in-person instruction and 3 days at home, which was our original plan in the summer and how we launched in New York. What we found is a few things. There are certainly benefits to it, right? But there are also some challenges. It is complex for our teachers. Our teachers are having to navigate seeing their students for 2 days and then not seeing their students for 5 days, during which they have some touches, very little, but largely families and students are doing asynchronous work on those 5 days when they're not in the building with teachers. And so we found that that has been challenging for our students and our families, and also for our staff in terms of just keeping that contact and that consistent academic work with students. We also, and this is an aspect of our planning that we have to take seriously, have found that going to 100% remote from this particular blended model comes with its own challenges as well, right? Because if students were being seen or taught in person 2 days out of the week, and we switch to fully remote, we have the opportunity to promote more live instruction in the remote model, but it requires a different schedule then, a different schedule for teachers, a different schedule for students, and of course families, which we believe we may be able to avoid with some changes to our plan. The last thing I'll say is that one of our great successes in the launch in New York has been the safety routines, the procedures, the mask wearing. I think we were all, families and staff alike, were concerned about whether our 5-year-old or 8-year-old children were going to be wearing masks, or our 12-year-olds for different reasons. But we found that with time and preparation with both families and students, and easing into the in-person process, we were actually able to be quite successful there. And so that's a takeaway for us as we look at launching Philly, how we ease into the in-person structure and make sure there's time and preparation to get safety routines and procedures 100% locked in, so we're successful from that first day. Because we really think that's one of the areas that we can't have any risk. We can't have any additional gaps where students or families or staff are caught off guard. This is some of the stuff that we can prevent. So with that, a little bit from what we've learned in our implementation up here, I'm going to shift back to Emily as we talk about our plans for implementing a blended model in Philly.
Thanks, Emily. Roger, you can head to the next slide. Great. So we do feel really grateful that we're part of this larger network and have been able to learn from our sister schools and have the networks of support in quickly iterating and turning around what we think is going to be the best model for our Philadelphia school here. So Roger, if you go to the next slide, I want to share the survey responses, and I'm really grateful for all of you who took time to give your input into this. We asked you 2 weeks ago what your preference was at the time for either the fully remote academy or the hybrid program. We are so grateful that we heard from 195 families, which is a really high percentage rate. And these data were really important in informing our model. Our model design would look different if we had the vast majority of families opting into an entirely remote model. So it was incredibly helpful to have these. Roger, if you go to the next slide, I'd also like to share a few other things that we've learned in the last 6 weeks that are really informing what we're calling our hybrid option 2.0. So our next version that has shifted a little bit from what we presented to you this summer. First, we've heard from families that our synchronous day, our day of live instruction on the computer, is really long, and that we are all feeling fatigue. Certainly Zoom fatigue is a real thing, but it's long for our kiddos, especially at their age. And so we've been really thoughtful of how we can kind of shift that a little bit. We've also heard from you that toggling between the synchronous live instruction and then the asynchronous independent instruction, the blue team and the red team that we've switched to, is challenging, that there's a lot of navigating that might take additional support from families and can be a little bit confusing with the current schedule. We've also heard and we've learned from our sister schools that teachers need to specialize. Our teachers are heroic. They're doing really remarkable work. And also they are learning so much right now that to do both, to teach 2 different models simultaneously, is really, really difficult to do well. And we've finally heard that both our families and our staff members want consistency in scheduling, given the many challenges and changes that have happened this year and that keep popping up, especially in this difficult year. So Roger, if you'll go to the next slide. So I'm going to turn it over now to Madison, who's been leading a lot of our design from a health and safety perspective that's informing our hybrid model 2.0.
Thanks, Emily. So in addition to all of the valuable input and feedback we've received from our families, in designing our hybrid option 2.0, we've grounded ourselves in our health and safety guiding principles. Our hybrid plan builds on that foundation that we've established already, including batching students into smaller groups to minimize exposure and keep our communities in our small groups together in classrooms, social distancing with smaller class sizes, and frequent intensive cleaning and disinfecting of spaces. Additionally, based on a lot of the feedback that we've heard from our New York schools and others in the community, our plan incorporates priorities such as minimizing transitions and exposure risks, including meal times, recess, staggering arrival and dismissal to maintain social distancing, and a phased re-entry. As Emily mentioned earlier, it's important for us to prioritize as our students re-enter our building, reinforcing and teaching safety procedures and protocols. What that means is that while the 19th will be the first possible day students return to the building, students will return in phases that will give us the time to teach and review and reinforce our safety procedures. Phases will be separated by 2 to 5 days, and all students will return to the building by September 9th. You can move to the next slide, Roger. Based on all of your feedback and based on those priorities, we've adjusted our hybrid model to provide stronger experience for students and families as we transition back to in-person learning by shifting to an AM/PM model. We'll provide the same high-level overview of our new and adjusted model and then go through some of the sample schedules to help us understand what a day of the life of a student will look like. Instead of being in person 2 days per week, we will be bringing back all of our students 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, for half a day, as you can see in the image here. Each student will be assigned to either an AM or PM cohort. Students who receive transportation through the School District of Philadelphia will be assigned to the AM cohort. Over the past few weeks, we've been fortunate to learn from various other contexts, and that is really what has influenced or impacted this model. And we're excited to work with your families to safely bring your students back to the building. Roger, you can move to the next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Elissa to discuss our in-person learning a little bit more in depth.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Madison. So just before I jump in, just want to stamp our phased reentry that Madison talked about. The first and earliest date that we would be welcoming students into our building is the 19th, and no students will be entering later than this Monday, December 7th. And so Emily's going to talk a little bit about that phased reentry later on in our session. So what I'm going to go over is a day in the life. We'll go over some sample kind of overviews on what each half day looks like, the half day at PHP, and then the half day at home. We'll also cover what this model looks like for those of you who are opting into our fully remote academy. Just to stamp what we shared earlier, one of the things that we are excited about with this model is that it allows for students, no matter which model you opt into, our hybrid 2.0 or our fully remote academy, the experience is mirrored, which was really, really important to us. So, for example, for students who are assigned to an AM/PM cohort, half of their day is in person. This model responds to and accommodates a number of things. The first is that we know that small groups are essential to support student learning, their social emotional needs, and also the health and safety for our students, families, and teachers while we're all in the building. This type of model with an AM/PM allows us to serve no more than 15 students, and based on that preliminary survey we shared, we're landing at about 10 to 12 students per classroom. We know that a number of you have shared input on screen time. We also are similarly concerned about the amount of time our students are in front of screens. This AM/PM model allows us to stay true to our academic model while also reducing the amount of time in front of a screen pretty significantly. So we've prioritized certain content areas to be taught in person, and then prioritize some content areas to be taught remotely because they lend itself, those classes lend themselves better to remote teaching. An example would be Hebrew. So as many of you have met some of our Hebrew teachers, Hebrew is fun and joyful and dynamic, and kids need to be able to see their Hebrew teachers' faces to build context as they're acquiring this new language. We also really wanted to make sure that we had a model that provided as much consistency as possible. So for those of you who do opt into our hybrid model, students have the ability to receive 4 half days of instruction at PHP with their teacher, while as our previous model would have only provided 2 full days, and then to Emily Fernandez's point, the remaining week, rest of the week, would essentially have been families on their own, with little to no guidance from teachers because our teachers can't be in 2 places at one time. This is also going to be true for our families who opt into the fully remote program. So they would also receive a half day worth of classes, and we're going to go through schedules, some sample schedules in a bit, with a teacher synchronously live, similar to what you're experiencing now. And then lastly, masks are able to be worn at all times. So Madison shared some of the trickier elements around planning were for movement to recess and at lunch. By having this model in the AM and PM, we are able to provide students with bagged lunches and breakfast for the following day, which eliminates any time period during the day where students would be unmasked. And of course, our special education supports and our supports for our multi-language learners are going to be present in both the in-person and at-home model. Next slide, please, Roger. So now we're on the other half of the day, which is primarily at-home learning. And so there are a couple of courses that will be offered at home. What I want to stamp here is it will be a combination of synchronous live, which is your child meeting their teacher in real time, asynchronous, which will be pre-recorded lessons that teachers will share with you, and independent learning. Independent learning refers to Amplify, Zearn, and independent reading, which you all likely know as Unite for Literacy, where kids are reading on their own. What you can expect to continue to receive are seesaw assignments as they've already been assigned to students, as well as teacher feedback, because our teachers do want to be in touch with students even when they are at home. And then again, our special education and multi-language learner supports and services. Next slide, please, Roger. So we've gone over an overview of what you can expect in each half day, right? A half day at PHP and a half day at home. And so now we wanted to provide you with a sample visual of what this schedule could look like for one of your students. So here's an AM sample schedule. So if a child is rostered to an AM cohort. So you'll see an 8:10 to 8:30 staggered arrival. Again, we will be staggering that, so it is possible that a certain grade has a 7:55 start time, for example. We will be sharing that information in the coming weeks. You'll see we are staying true to our model. Each day is opening and closing with a morning meeting and a closing circle, which is so important for students to have that bookend. And then in terms of our courses, for those of you who are already familiar with our model, you will see it is very similar to what students are already experiencing and also what they would experience if this were a more typical year. So math, guided reading, reading and writing workshop. Then you'll see that every day from 11:30 to 1, the building will be closed to all students and families. And this is really important from 11:30 to 1 for two reasons. Our team needs time to do cleaning and just sweeping the building to make sure that it is prepared for our PM cohort. And our teachers need time to plan. So with this model, our teachers don't have a break at all until the middle of the day. And that is important for them to make sure that they are prepared for their PM classes, but also that they are working together to prep the academic content that they need to teach their lessons. At home, you'll see is 1 to 4. And so this is where you have both synchronous live and asynchronous pre-recorded lessons, as well as independent learning. And so here we do have some flexibility to reduce some screen time. And so for Zearn and Amplify and independent reading, we will have some suggested blocks for you for how you can structure your student's day. And also we understand that every family has different needs. And so this is an area where families will have some choice and flexibility to engage with those platforms. Next slide, Roger. And so this is a sample schedule for a student who is rostered to our PM cohort. So what you'll notice is these schedules from the AM cohort to the PM cohort are essentially identical but flipped. So if you have a student who is rostered to a PM cohort, you start your day with the combination of synchronous live, asynchronous pre-recorded, and independent learning. And then students will transition to school with afternoon meeting starting at 1 o'clock. Same thing as morning meeting, just starting in the afternoon. And then again, closing their day with closing circle with our core content areas taking place at PHP. Next slide, Roger, please. And here is a sample schedule for students and families who opt into our fully remote academy. So as mentioned earlier, student schedules for those who opt into the remote option will closely mirror the schedules of our students and families who opt into our hybrid model. So students in our remote model will receive a half day of synchronous live instruction with a teacher, and then a half day of a combination of synchronous live, asynchronous pre-recorded, and independent learning. So again, all of those same courses that are offered live to students at PHP will be offered synchronous live to your students who are in the fully remote option. All right, so now I'm going to hand it off to Emily, who is going to go into, she's going to go into a little bit of the trade-offs between the hybrid transition that we came to in our planning.
Thank you, Alyssa. We know this is a lot of information, so I also just want to pause and reiterate, we are recording this. We will be distributing it with the slides and the full recording. So if it is too much to absorb at this late hour at 8 p.m. at night, do not fear, you will have access to this. We also want to say that while we know this is complex, we do think that this is the most straightforward way to transition to a safe hybrid in-person option. We also know that there is nothing normal about this year. It's not normal for you, it's not normal for your students, it's not normal for our team. And we know that any model that we introduce will involve some challenges and some trade-offs. And it's really about finding what we think will best work to maximize the deep needs that we've heard from you and we're seeing in our students, and to make sure that our teachers are supported to really execute a wonderful rest of the year. So two of the trade-offs we do anticipate with this. In any transition to a hybrid model, we will have to consider some reassignments for teachers. So as you can imagine, if 25% of our families want to stay in an entirely remote model, we will need to dedicate a teacher to teaching entirely remotely. So that will also mean that some students will have new teachers. We are going to do our best to maintain continuity, both within a cohort and to a teacher, but that is a possibility that's coming. We also know, while hopefully 4 days of having a touch point with our team and your students seeing their friends sounds wonderful, a half day can present some hassles in terms of transportation. So we know this is challenging. We are here for you to manage through, and we're making these commitments to you. First, we are going to do whatever we can to support the transition to a new teacher, should your student be one of the few students who does need to have a new teacher in this new marking period. There will be lots of continuity for your child. Specialist teachers will remain the same, likely Hebrew teacher will remain the same, so that student experience will be consistent in that regard. Again, we're going to try to maintain cohort stability for their friends as well. We're also going to do our best, because you will know which class they are in weeks before we enter into it, to go ahead and make some connections ahead of time, so your student is excited to meet their new teacher. We also commit to you to make sure that siblings or any family members that are living in the same house are in the same cohort. We know that these challenges are significant, and so we want to make transportation or any of that as easy as possible for you. So while we can't accept any morning or afternoon preference, we will honor hardships. And so if your family is in a position where you are at risk of losing employment or something painful like that, we will work with you. And then I want to reiterate, we are very proud of our Boys and Girls Club partnership. If you've not heard about this, do reach out. We're happy to share information. There are still spots available at the Boys and Girls Club. It is located just upstairs. And any child who is part of the Boys and Girls Club will still have access to that program at the time when they are not in the in-school session and they're at the at-home session, the opposite half of the day. Roger, go ahead to the next one. So So all of that being said, we do see some real benefits to this new model, this 2.0. First, we think there'll be daily consistency. I know that a lot of us have struggled with routines, and this is important, especially developmentally for our kiddos. It's going to be a shorter day of live instruction, so less toggling for you between these asynchronous and synchronous platforms. You'll have much more flexibility for designing the at-home experience should you opt into the hybrid. It'll also allow smaller cohorts. So we know that smaller cohorts is really critical for more differentiated instruction for our kiddos. And this will be enabled now without having to do the red team, blue team that can be confusing. And what we've learned from our sister schools in New York, that adaptability to come in and out of these models is really important. And so this schedule actually lets us switch at the drop of a dime to remote should we need to, without actually having to reschedule, recohort, or do anything like that. So the experience will be more consistent. And then finally, as Madison and Elissa have noted, this is the best way to maximize safety and minimize exposure. So without having to do meal times in school in terms of taking off masks and cleaning, it really supports in the strictest of our safety protocols. Go ahead to the next slide, Roger. So we want to give you a timeline on what's to come. So this Wednesday, October 13th, you will receive both this PowerPoint, the slide deck, a recording of this video, and then a registration form to make a decision of what's best for you and your family for marking period 2. So we are not asking you to commit for the whole year. We're asking for you to make a decision for the next quarter. It'll be kind of a clean start for the next quarter. We will then revisit it as the third quarter and the fourth quarter approach. Registrations will then be due pretty quickly after that, within a week, and we really, really need your support to get 100% participation in terms of submitting registrations. If we don't hear from you, we will be calling you, so please do us a favor and just go ahead and get that right in. Our team is tiny but mighty, but needs all the time we can get. We will then let you know the cohort assignment and the start date. So as Madison referred to it, we'll kind of have a rolling start because it is so important that we're able to teach these procedures first virtually and then try them out with smaller groups to maintain safety and make sure that our arrival and dismissal is as seamless as possible. So you'll find out your cohort assignments and your start dates on November 6th. We'll do another town hall about safety and to run through all of those arrival procedures with you on November 16th. And then our first group we'll welcome on November 19th. We will then be through all of the phases by December 9th. And I will say finally, all of this, of course, is pending safety levels and community spread levels being such that we can return. We are very hopeful. If there's any school that can do it, it's us. We feel confident about that. And also we are paying very close attention to the daily rates every single day. So now I'm actually going to hand it over to Madison to talk a little bit about what's next exactly for your family.
Thanks, Emily. So as Emily mentioned, this week by October 14th, you will have received a copy of this town hall, the recording, our frequently asked questions, as well as the form to register your child for either the hybrid model or the fully remote academy. Important to note, if you choose the hybrid model, you can switch to the remote academy if the hybrid model ends up not working well for you and your family. You cannot switch the other way from the remote to the hybrid model until the next marking quarter. That's to allow us to plan for our students in the building and to make sure that we're following our social distancing and safety procedures at all times. Stay tuned for updates on our timing. Like Emily just mentioned, re-entry plans are going to be designed based on the number of families who ultimately register, as well as all of the important data regarding the COVID spread in our community. Please look out for communications on your specific start date as early as November 19th. And like Emily mentioned, we really appreciate you getting this information, your registration into us as soon as possible. The deadline to do so is Wednesday, October 21st. And if you need any assistance completing that registration, or if you have any questions at any time, please give us a call to our main number, and we're happy to support you in completing that process. Roger, you can move to the next slide. I'm going to turn it over to John with some info on what comes next for our school.
Okay, thank you, Madison. A couple things. One of the questions that came in on the chat, which I just responded to, and I also want to take the opportunity to speak a little bit about here, is when will this end, right? When will we get back to a normal school year, a 5-day-a-week school day where kids are in school for a good, 7 or longer hour day? It's really guesswork at this point. I do not think personally that any public schools in Philadelphia or New York or in most of the United States are going to return to a fully in-person 5-day-a-week schedule until next school year, the 21-22 school year. I wish I had better news on that front, but everything that we're reading at least seems to suggest that that's going to be the case. The decision will not be ours. It's going to be made by government officials, public health experts. It's going to depend on vaccine efforts and other public health efforts so that folks deem it safe to come back. And just to reiterate, the reason why it's so important that we have all this in place right now is the virus spreads most dangerously when large numbers of people are indoors in spaces that aren't well ventilated and aren't wearing masks. That's really the sort of simplest way of putting it. By limiting the number of children who are in the building at any one time, by ensuring that we've done all the ventilation work that we've done, and by ensuring that we follow all the other safety protocols, most importantly mask wearing, we are going to do everything we can as a country, as a city, and as a school community to keep folks safe. It's possible there'll be a full-time return earlier, but we think that the combination that we're offering here of 4-day-a-week half-day, plus the Boys and Girls Club partnership for those who need to extend to a full day through that partnership, really is more, frankly, than what most other schools that we've seen are offering, particularly around the nature of this child care partnership and the idea of a consistent in-person opportunity for your children. So we certainly understand if it doesn't work for everyone, but I did want to flag that. In addition, I want to give a sense of what might happen even with a successful hybrid return in terms of the kickoff of that model. In our Harlem school, we had a staff member test positive recently. And when something like that happens, a student or a staff member or a family member of a student or a staff member, we follow very specific protocols that we have developed that are themselves consistent with state and city health guidelines. So the State of Philadelphia Department of Health, the City of Philadelphia Department of Health have requirements about what has to happen depending on whether there's what's called a primary infection, meaning someone who's part of the school building's community, a student or a staff member, a secondary infection, or what they call a tertiary infection. You know someone who knows someone who is infected. It depends on the nature of a given infection in the school community. What might happen is that particular staff member or student would need to quarantine for a period of time until they have a positive test and a certain number of days have gone by. It might mean, if it's a child in a classroom, that the children in that cohort need to be shifted to remote instruction for a period of time. And if we're unlucky enough, God forbid, to have a series of infections in the school building, then the entire school might need to close for a period of time before returning to hybrid. To return to the example of our Harlem school, the infection was not a teacher, it was another staff member who tested positive, who'd had limited interaction with other staff members and with children. And based on that, the school did not have to close, nor did any of our classrooms, but we implemented, again, a very strict set of protocols consistent with government requirements to handle that situation. So just want to give you a sense here that again, as I also mentioned earlier, our 2 Brooklyn schools had to close not because of infections in the school, but because of the community. That's also out of our hands. So it is possible 2 things could happen that might close the school down that would have nothing to do with infections in the school. One is government may say that this school, because of the community that it's located in, might need to close, or government may say all schools in Philadelphia need to push off their launch. We might find that we're delayed in our planned November return to hybrid because of the spread of the virus on the ground in Philadelphia, or we might find that after we open, the city or the state orders schools to close. We hope those things won't happen. We, again, I think it pains me, it pains all of us to have to present such uncertainty. In a normal year, most of this is under a school's control. We're trying to operate as best we can and provide you as much information as we can, as much thought and care and responsiveness as we can, knowing that there's so much that's outside of all of our control. So I just wanted to share that with you. Again, at some point, we will be past this situation and we'll return to normal operating, and we'll be thrilled to have everybody back full time. Next slide, please.
Thanks, John. So now we are going to run through some frequently asked questions that either we've gotten from parents or certainly anticipate. And then, Roger, if you'll go to the next slide, we also want you to be able to ask your questions. And so rest assured, we will answer all questions. Thank you, Ms. Farmer, for asking a couple already. Please feel free to type them in the chat box. We will be sure to get back to you as quickly as we can. And if we don't answer them tonight in this session, we will follow up with you either personally or through a school-wide email for the benefit of everyone. So the first question on the next slide is really around how many students will be in the building. So Madison, if you could just run us through quickly kind of what we anticipate in each classroom, especially now that we've set some of them.
Sure. So all of our classrooms are unique in the building, and each classroom's maximum occupancy is determined based on our ability to maintain social distancing at all times. Capacity varies based on the specific size and shape of the community. I believe Elissa mentioned earlier that at a maximum in our largest classroom, the maximum occupancy with social distancing is half of our normal capacity. That would look like 15 students. However, based on some of the data that we're seeing from families in terms of intent to return to hybrid or enrolling into our fully remote academy, we anticipate the number to be lower than that. I believe Elissa mentioned 10 to 12 students. The total number of students in the building at any given time will be less than 50% of our normal capacity. And adults in the classroom will be limited to the teachers who directly teach with those students in that classroom based on our batching model and key support staff.
Great. Roger, you can go to the next slide. Okay. So how will we reinforce mask wearing and social distancing with children? We've gotten the hang of it a little bit since we've seen you all, so thank you for being so thoughtful about always having your child arrive with the mask when we've seen you. But I actually want to kick this to Emily Fernandez, who's been highly involved in supporting all of our New York schools.
Yeah, thank you. So I will say that this was a major concern from families, from teachers, from all of us prior to opening in New York in mid-September. And it is not a concern at this point at all. You know, I was able to do a walkthrough of our Harlem school, which has pre-K through 8th grade. I walked through all of the classrooms very carefully from the door with very limited contact, if any, just, you know, waving and taking a look. And all but 3 of our students had their masks exactly covering their nose and over their chin. And 3 of them, it had like inched down, you know, and someone gave a little nonverbal and they popped it right back up over their nose, over the tip of their nose. So I think that's where we're going to be. I have full confidence that that will be the reality in Philly as well. And the way we did that and the way we're doing that right now as we prepare for launch is through pretty direct and intensive professional development with staff so that we can then do that with kids, where we practice routines, we do lessons, we talk about the importance of mask wearing, all of these things. And we've seen that, like anything we teach and reinforce again, students are able to step up to the plate. I think that our youngest people also don't have necessarily some of the complex relationship with masks that we might as adults. They're just like, this is part of the new normal. I have to wear it when I'm in school. I love being in school. I put it on and ready to go. We also will partner very heavily with families because we want to be clear that everyone understands if you want your child to be part of our hybrid in-person instruction, they are going to wear a mask throughout the full day. You know, they'll certainly have an opportunity to drink water or, you know, any of these types of things. Like those things are built in. We're even working with teachers. We're going to work with them on how do we do that safely and how do we teach kids it's time for a water break and then I'm going to put my mask back on. But for the bulk of the day, particularly since we're not doing any meals, we will have masks on.
All right, next question, Roger. I think John went through a little bit of this, and again, we'll be able to revisit. The question is what happens if somebody tests positive? We will revisit this in detail at our Net Safety Town Hall on November 16th. So Roger, if you'll go to the next question. So what will behavioral and student culture support look like for students during this time? And Emily, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you've seen in New York and then our approach here as well.
So again, this has been one of the things that we were truly thoughtful about in opening New York and also as planning for opening in Philly. And I would just say that responsive classroom is our approach to discipline and classroom culture any year, right? It's a belief that we believe that students, that children can make good choices, can learn good habits, even if they're 5, even if they're 7. And so while that certainly feels like it's at a higher stakes in this environment where a kid, you know, a young lady, young man, a young child making a choice and getting into a tussle with another teammate feels so much higher stakes right now, we're still going to ground it in the same values that we know kids with love, boundary, and teaching can make good choices. So we've really leaned heavily on responsive classroom. We've seen it be very successful in our schools that have opened in New York. They've opened safely, calmly, beautifully. Kids are like actually really excited to be back in the school building also, just from their own perspective. And so they're really invested in building a beautiful community, even more so in some ways than a regular year. Philly has also taken some really intense steps with zones of regulation, which I'm sure sounds very familiar to all of our families. They do zones check-ins multiple times throughout the day, and I'm going to ask Alyssa to talk a little bit more about that. But this is designed to be a consistent structure that students can expect and start to monitor their own well-being and are being taught and getting opportunities to practice that throughout the day. We know that this time period brings emotions and trauma for everyone, right, of all ages. And so the zones practice actually is a way for students to monitor, self-monitor, and respond to where they're at and start to become aware of themselves and their emotions. And we've seen pretty strong success in the past 6 weeks in Philly with this model. The other piece I'll say is just, you know, you've got a few of your leaders here on the call tonight. There are others as well who are wonderful. I'm sure you are familiar with them, and our full special education team who all support both teachers and students. And they are certainly fully active in our 100% remote model, and that will only continue, and plotting that out really intentionally as we shift to in-person instruction as well. Alyssa, do you want to add to this?
I think you did a great job, Emily. The one thing that I would add is our students have done a really beautiful job taking to zones. So when Emily says zones of regulation, what that refers to is when you hear your child's teacher talking about what zone are you in, and then there are colors that they note. And the reason we started with zones of regulation with consistency and prioritization this year is because we want to support students in being able to communicate around their feelings and help students understand that there are no bad feelings, right? We all have feelings, and then we need to make a plan on how we're going to respond to those feelings. And so that is going to continue to take place in all of our models at Philadelphia Hebrew Public when students are at home and kids who have opted into the fully remote program.
Great. Next question, Roger. So we have a question around hand washing, both in terms of staff hand washing and sanitizing and student hand washing. And I'll just open with, if you've been in our building, you see hand sanitizer throughout the building. We will continue to have that. We also have kind of an inventory and status of the number of supplies we need to have on hand at all given times. So that will continue. But Silas, I would actually love for you to address a little bit in terms of routines for students for hand washing and safety procedures.
Yeah, and so Emily Fernandez referenced this earlier. One of the most beneficial things about the phased kind of reentry or the time before reentering is being able to teach and reinforce routines to students even virtually. And so the example I would use here is our staff. Before we invited our staff back into the building, we did a number of sessions on health and safety routines, and some of it felt a little bit silly for adults who know the importance of washing our hands and staying clean, and also we still do it. So we will be offering a number of kind of reinforcers in the virtual classrooms, in morning meeting and throughout the day, in the same way that you see zones check-ins built into classes before we transition to in-person instruction. When students return in person, they will experience and receive that same type of reinforcement throughout the day. So even right now, as we've had extremely small batches of students in person to take MAP testing, every time a child enters our building, we have them use hand sanitizer, and every time they go to the bathroom, there's an adult that is outside reminding kids, remember when you're finished using the restroom, you need to wash your hands with water and soap. And then when that child comes out, we ask, did you remember to wash your hands with water and soap? So as many opportunities as possible to reinforce those skills, we are certainly going to be doing throughout the day in all of our models.
Great. Our next question here, Roger, if you'll shift to it, is around grading. And so I know we have our first report card coming, but it's really around what will grading look like in the fully remote option versus the hybrid option. I do think this is a real benefit of now having two options that mirror each other. So Elissa, I'd love if you could jump in here and share a little bit about our approach on Emily as well, if you have anything to add.
So grades are being provided to students using a combination of work samples that they're submitting through Seesaw. So you'll see, as an example, there is an exit ticket for all reading and math courses each day. They're also being graded on participation. We appreciate the partnership that families are working so hard to get kids in class. We also know that it is important for kids to talk and listen to their teachers and classmates to continue to journey toward new learning. And so a combination of classwork, participation, and then assessment as well. So more traditional forms of assessment. So for example, reading running records. When students read their text, that growth will be tracked to make sure that kids continue to make growth on their personal learning goals. So all of those things combined are being put together for grades, and so you all can expect to receive report cards that show your students' progress, not only based on their own kind of baseline data at the beginning of the year, but also how they're doing in grade level standards. Emily, anything to add here?
No, I would just say that we do look at ways to innovate right now. And so while we are certainly trying to make sure that the great practices we know are true of any schooling from all of our years past, we're also trying to explore all of the great new ways to access kids' learning right now. And so there might be things that look unfamiliar or feel different, like so much of our world right now, but we are strictly trying to make sure we are getting at how students are learning and getting a sense of where they're at. And then the thing that I would just reinforce from what was said and what was on the slides is that our grading and our instruction, be it in 100% remote or hybrid, will be aligned, so that if you are a PHP student, you are getting a PHP education that is robust and full and thoughtful in both models.
Yeah, we also recognize that it's an incredibly stressful time for families, and we know that for us particularly, given the age of our students, our kids are requiring a lot of support, and so families are supporting with logging into Seesaw. We hope that you have noticed that your child is increasing in their independence in navigating our platforms, but we also want to name here that we are offering flexibility at this time because we know it is a challenging time for everyone. So an example of that would be, you will see all assignments for this marking period in Seesaw for the entirety of the marking period. So the assignments don't disappear, because we recognize that for families, it might be better for you and your family to work on assignments on the weekend, for example. And so we certainly want to work with you. And if you have any questions about work submission or grading, please reach out to your child's teacher, who is prepared to support you in making sure there's a plan for work submission.
Okay. So we have another question here about dismissal and arrival. So Madison, if you could give it at a very high level, again, we are going to be going into more details on the 16th before we transition.
So arrival and dismissal will look different this year, and may likely will take longer than in previous years. All families and students will be expected to maintain and follow social distancing and health safety measures when coming into and exiting the building. And families will not enter the building as they have in previous years. So like Emily mentioned, we'll be sharing more details at our town hall on November 16th to walk you through those specific arrival and dismissal plans.
Great. And then I think we have one last question around visitors in the building. And I will just field this. So we are really closely monitoring anyone who's in the building right now. And so we are going to really limit the number of folks in the building. And as you've seen, if you have arrived to our building, we will often walk up to the front vestibule to greet you, whether it's to hand off supplies or a package or a Chromebook or something like that. So that will continue to be our practice, to make sure that we are really maintaining all of our health and safety procedures as much as possible. Thank you all. I know we're nearing our hour, and I do see a couple more questions coming in, but I will ask, if you have questions that we have not answered, please feel free to pop them in the chat or send us an email. If you do put them in the chat, I would so appreciate if you could include your name and perhaps your email, because then we can be sure to get back to you. If you have a handle on your Zoom that is not your name, it's really hard for us to identify to whom we should respond. I did see a couple questions in there around testing, and so COVID testing. I know that this is really at the crux of kind of our societal strategy to beating this virus. It's our understanding in Philadelphia right now that we cannot mandate testing for employees to come back, though we are highly encouraging it. So we have gone through all of the options to get testing with our team members, checked that, of course, our insurance covers it. And then we're also looking into a variety of home tests or various kits that we can purchase. As you may know, they're quite expensive at this point, so we need to manage a strategy that we can make sure is safe and reasonable as we move forward for the rest of the year. So this is a question we will make sure is at the top of the list at our next health and safety, and we're monitoring closely as any guidelines change in the city and the state here. Certainly an area where we differ significantly from New York as well. Wonderful. So if I haven't missed anything else, John, Emily, let me know if I should jump in here if I've missed another question in the chat.
I think we've covered most of them. As Emily shared, please, if your question didn't get answered, if other questions occur to you after hearing all this or after getting the written summary of it, just reach out. The team will be responsive to any concerns or questions you have, and we'll do our best to take care of you and your children.
Yeah. Thank you all. We appreciate you. We know you are our partners in this work. This is tough. It will pass eventually, and we're so grateful that you are part of our community. So reflect on these. Stay tuned for an email again with all of these slides, a recording of this town hall, and then a registration to come on Wednesday. And we are here for you, whatever questions you have. Have a great night.